Howdy, ladies and gentlemen of the YouTube side, and welcome to something that's not quite slop, but also not quite content. A little bit of a middle ground that I'm otherwise now dubbing the pipeline, where rather than just doing reactionary content, we take a subject or something that's happening within the world or the industry that's pertinent to our conversational needs, and we talk about it. Now, as I'm sure any of you who have been on the internet for the last couple of years might have noticed, the quality of our average games from the AAA genre has diminished tremendously.
What is this?
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
This theme of lazy game design and greedy, hungry money grubbing, desperately trying to clamor for your wallets like a ex-wife that's decided that your house looks better in their possession than yours, is becoming part of the norm in most sentiments of the live service industry, and seen no more so than within the looter-shooter genre. Now, this isn't to say that all AAA games are morally, intellectually, and ethically bankrupt, but it is an increasing trend of seeing games that put the least amount of effort in possible to get, and still trying to get the most amount of money out of you possible. Wow, this might require some editing. And although this is a very subjective manner, you need only look as far as games such as Destiny, Warframe, the biggest example probably being Anthem, and many other looter shooters, and even some outside the loot shooters genre, that have either started on a high pedestal and slowly fallen from grace. Hunt Showdown also being another good example of a game that initially started on very high moral grounds, very fair, equal distribution of gameplay mechanics, and encouragement of monetization with an equal amount of gameplay. And over time, a lot of these games, Destiny 2, Hunt Showdown, and obviously Anthem again being the biggest example, ended up going down the avenue of capitalizing as much as possible on monetary investments and trying to turn the player into a payer. This has been epitomized with possibly one of the laziest, sloppiest games that has been released in quite some time. And that's saying something, since the standard was set from Anthem all those eons ago, with Suicide Squad, a game developed by Rocksteady, and even in the early stages of this game's development, and from the earliest days of the earliest trailers that we saw, we all kind of had this feeling that this game was probably not going to be good on release. And oh boy, were we proven right. If at the end of the day it looks like a duck, smells like a duck, and sounds like a duck, then my god, it's probably going to be a duck. Right, so I kind of wanted to take a look at this video that IGN made, and I don't like making topic conversations on like bad subjects, but it's hysterical to see just how eager certain studios are to kind of capitalize on their audience's eagerness to drop money on a game that's very evidently bad. And my god, I don't know what, I honestly don't know how to like articulate this in the best form, but we all, like, I saw this, some of my friends saw this, we all knew this game was going to be hot garbage on launch, and I swear people were given every opportunity to avoid this game like the plague. But what? Surprised Pikachu face, this game that was predicted to be a scam and also to be nothing more than a vapid, shallow, pedantic way to bait your money into the pockets of AAA developers who don't really give a shit about developing a game that's worth a damn? What? You mean that was true? Even though we all predicted it and you bought it anyway? I mean, if anything, this might be more of a testament to how friggin' pilled people are into falling prey to scam games and lazy games that are made by developers who are apathetic. But let's see what this video had to say, and I'll probably inject my own opinion into it as we go.
You know, but well, you know, these guns are a bit shit.
I mean, for me, dude, the game doesn't even look that good. Like, it's got this like hyper realistic element in a. I mean, like conceptually, this game could work. I mean, if you guys ever watched the Suicide Squad movies, the entire concept is that you're saying things from a different perspective, and you know, it's the anti-hero element, everything. Like conceptually, people love this idea. And even if Jared Leto's Joker was a little bit questionable, I thought personally the concept of Suicide Squad was great. It's just when it's executed like this, when there's no effort to make it even remotely enjoyable, you can have a concept that is perfect, but if the experience of playing that concept is just as vapid as like a two-dimensional plank of wood, from what I've heard, this game has like 3 game modes, and the process of going through the entire game and killing the Justice League, which is cool, has no substance to it.
Disappointment of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League isn't just about its quality, it's about what it's not as much as about what it is. There's very little of what made developer Rocksteady's games so great in the past, near unparalleled superhero power trips that sit alongside Insomniac's critically acclaimed Spider-Man series.
Okay, and that right there is one of the biggest things that I think is what draws people in. Now, when it comes to looter shooters, the reason why, when we think about it, the reason why this sort of predatory mindset is usually present in looter shooters is because the looter shooter genre is very easy to emulate. It is a very simple franchise and game style to make a game to. A looter shooter doesn't necessarily require much in terms of substance to get a gameplay loop going. And more often than not, the entire concept of a loot shooter is to be a hands-off, let the player experience the game the way they want. And it's a more immersive type thing that allows you to very much experience that power fantasy. And when you only have maybe 2 or 3 core principles to build off of, the actual function of making the game around that is very streamlined. It's very simple. So the fact that you have studios that take advantage of that to put out a game that only has the bare bones around those fundamentals, but nothing else of substance, there is a clear-cut difference between a studio that is using the looter shooter genre to push a game that was intended to be good versus a looter shooter game that was intended to be just a scam. And again, this precipice happens within many other genres. It's just within the looter shooter, it's the most endemic because of how easy it is to take advantage of, because of how much less effort you have to do to make a functional game for a looter shooter. Think of any other category. Think of an RPG. Think of a story-driven game. Think of anything else like an MMO. In most other genres of games, there are more fundamentals you have to put effort into to make something that is viably playable. Because of the looter shooter genre, they can, so long as there is looting and shooting, if those are core and present, they can put that game out, even if everything else is vapid as hell. So that's why I think that's kind of playing it. It is also then the power fantasy that draws people in. People see a game that allows them to be an unrivaled god, and of course that's going to draw them in, because most people who play games in this modern era, there are the younger generation who want the quick hit dopamine Fortnite-like games, or the ones who are aging, who are very likely to be latched onto an IP. Like, you slap the iconography of Star Wars, Justice League, Marvel onto anything, and people will buy it. You need only look at that horrendously clunky Guardians of the Galaxy game that came out in, I think, what was it, fucking 2022. It was a very good-looking game, and it allowed you that power fantasy. And yes, it was probably a better example of something that wasn't quite so intellectually bankrupt, but it was very endemic to how an IP sells and how power fantasy sells. So you, in the eyes of, when you look at this in the eyes of a developer, it's a win-win situation. They don't have to overly rely on trying to establish a universe. They don't have to overly rely on putting much effort into creating a functional game, and they have infinitely more opportunities of monetizing their game in any sense. And again, there's a large spectrum that can affect how this sort of emphasizes, but this is exactly the reason why this theme of game is usually the one that gets capitalized on the most by studios that just want to make a quick buck.
It's also the latest in a frustratingly long line of
beloved
beloved
that was this Marvel Snap game. I forgot about that.
Delving into unwelcoming, loot-infested live service waters.
Oh god, some of these games. Oh, Redfall, dude. That's a game I should have. Oh, there you go, Anthem. Dude, 2019. We've been putting up shit with this kind of nonsense in 2019. I mean, this kind of stuff's happened before, and some games don't always start ethically bankrupt, but then end up going ethically bankrupt. Like, look at Destiny, look at Warframe, look at Hunt Showdown. These games originally were really well balanced with monetization versus gameplay. Nowadays, Destiny is a shell of its former self. Warframe isn't maybe as bad, but it still has definitely gone down the avenue of being more capitalistic on their audience. And Hunt Showdown still has great gameplay, great system, but it is still functionally a very simple game with very disproportionate amounts of monetization.
perilous leap for many to take, with success limited to very few not called Bungie. And I hope we're now at the end of this detrimental trend that's plagued so many.
I want to make it very apparent as well. At the end of the day, if you enjoy the game and you are willingly spending your money, that's fair. Because at the end of the day, this kind of people who complain about this kind of stuff, it's a very minute audience, but it's something that's interesting to talk about because from the perspective of the average buyer, you never see this kind of stuff. But for those who maybe are more inclined for their ethical decisions and whether something is made ethically, this is a conversation that needs to be had more because a lot of people get taken advantage of and lose out money on a game that they had higher expectations for. Like when you have a game that's produced by a AAA developer and all they put out is a bare bones game with very minimal functionality and the only things you wanted from that game was the experience of playing that IP that you thought was there and a game of substance that allows you to have that sense of satisfaction from playing it. At the end of the day, if you feel as though you've got your money's worth, then that's fair. But in these cases, it just isn't the case. This just feels very reminiscent of Marvel Snap.
Its trademark deep RPG writing in favor of Anthem's cold, hollow RNG-fueled exosuits.
Vapidity.
It was the first real notable example of this happening.
The thing is, Anthem from a thematic point of view was great, but it was just shallow. It was as wide as the ocean, but as shallow as a puddle. Like, the entire concept of flying around in giant exosuits was awesome. I freaking played this day one, and the idea of flying around and everything, cool, awesome. But when there's nothing to do, you have no player retention. But by that point, people have already spent $70 on the game, probably a bunch on the microtransactions. They make their bank. And the only people that really lose out are the people who develop the game, because the publishers make their money. They haven't lost out on development time. And it's, yeah, anyway.
Studio ripping apart from its roots to chase high-risk trends popularized by the likes of Destiny.
I did like Anthem, though.
James
I did like
told
Anthem.
Rock Paper Shotgun
I wonder if we can talk about Warframe in this.
Warframe
is definitely a leader in this category.
It got away from everything. It's kind of like the anti-BioWare game. There have since been others chasing these online looter-shooter trends that have
I mean, okay, let's look at this. One of the lead reasons why this, and I want to like extend on this, one of the lead reasons why this subject of game gets capitalized on is because it's very easy to capitalize on the human mindset as to how we receive rewards. Humans get shiny, you know, we have been conditioned, if you will, that when we see, you know, we see a green, that feels nice, you know? Over the last decade or so, we've been sort of conditioned to see certain things, you know? You see a blue item, you see a green item, you're like, oh, that's cool, that's definitely rare. That's like, we've been conditioned to see these colors as our reward. It's very much a Pavlovian training. So once you've been kind of conditioned, that it's a dopamine hit, it's a serotonin hit. You get that, haha, funny number go up, and it's that correlation to improvement and getting that reward. It's the same reason why gambling is addictive. And in the looter shooter genre, that entire precipice of how we perceive rewards and that dopamine hit that we get is how these studios capitalize on what we're trying to seek. We see another game that allows us to get serotonin and an instant hit of dopamine from getting that reward. It's like, best example from what we used to do it, MMOs. MMOs did this perfectly. You get a green, you hit need, you roll. There's like multiple layers of dopamine of gambling. So when you get that epic, when you see funny number go up, you get that, oh, I want more of that, I want more of that. And when a game is as superficial as Suicide Squad is, they capitalize on that by giving you that instant hit, but then when that feeling and that elation of getting that big, fat, juicy epic is no longer satisfying, you're looking for more outside that loot spectrum. So when you have the loot spectrum, and that is no longer giving you the dopamine, the game needs to rely on the shooting. Like, does shooting this gun make me feel good? Because then, when the looting element starts wearing thin, you've got shooting to enjoy. But if the shooting is very vapid and very superficial, then it's not going to hold you to it. But what the point here is that the developers are relying on this. They're relying on that gambling sensation and the addiction to rewards. and how easy it is to give the audience a reward from a game like a loot shooter. Because once they've gotten tired of this, they've already sunk enough time to the point where when they start looking for that dopamine hit from the other elements of the game, like the shooting, like the lore, like the story, they've suddenly realized, wait a minute, this shit doesn't exist. The only thing they put time into was hooking us with the superficial looting mechanics. And then you've completely missed the fact that the game was vapid and shallow as anything. By that point, you probably can't refund it. By that point, you've already sunk far too much time in. By that point, you've probably already sunk money into microtransactions, because that's a whole different ethical conversation about how we've been conditioned into being okay with loot boxes and being like, yes, well, I got this one item, so I should invest $5. I mean, it's only $5 to get the other item, or that's not even talking about how that then includes the predatory necessity of premium currency. Like, if you want to know when a game is trying to take advantage of you, if it has premium currency, it is taking advantage of you. Because in every game that uses premium currency, they will always put into arbitrary and very predatory amounts that you can buy. Like, there'll be an item that's worth, I don't know, 550 coins, but they only sell you coins in increments of 250 or 600. So at that point, you either have to buy 2 of these, which won't even give you enough, so you then have to buy 3, which gives you too much, or you buy the one above, which is still too much and leaves you with 50, and it's done in a way that it's incredibly smart. There's actually a video out there of some developers at a business conference where they are saying to these game developers, if your game doesn't have my premium currency, do it. You must put premium currency in to make your game financially viable. And when you've got 50 left, you're like, well, shit, dude, that's just wasted currency. But then you think to yourself, shit, dude, well, if I've got 50, I might as well just buy some extra so I can round it out and buy something else later. And then that then leads into it's a hook, line, and sinker moment. And that to me is what most of these loot shooters do. And Suicide Squad is doing it to an egregious level. That's the philosophy as to why looter shooters are not only addictive, but how they predate on your gambling pilled mindset. Some games do it more egregiously than others, but you can always tell. Like, best example, Diablo Immortal and Diablo 4. These games are scum. Absolute scum. If you want to know when a game is doing this respectfully, it's when the game allows you to farm for the premium currency and earn it just by playing the game. If the game is doing that, it's a much more respectable version. And usually that's something that happens in free-to-play games. If a game is free-to-play, it is more ethically it's more ethically permitted, I suppose, to monetize the game in that way to encourage people to spend money. But that goes into the whole conundrum of, how much value do you put on things? Like, because in reality, everything you're buying in the game the only value it has is what you give it. You are not owning anything tactfully. There is no physical thing you are buying other than the idea of the thing you're buying. But still, hopefully this articulates the point. That's why this theme of games don't... This is why this subject is very heavy around this kind of game. You do get it with other games, but it's most around live service and loot shooters, because it's, again, the easiest to capitalize on.
Gone out of fashion with each passing year. Arcane brought none of its best-in-class level design to the empty...
I will say, I do think it's okay to have monetized cosmetics, but if there is any element of gameplay that is tied to monetization, your game is instantly ethically corrupt and morally corrupt. And I think it's important for people to educate themselves to know when they're getting hoodwinked.
Vampiric streets of Redfall. Crystal Dynamics promised much in its Marvel's Avengers campaign, but lost its way completely regarding its live service offerings. And most recently,
I played that game for like 2 hours
in
and
their
it bored the
expertly
socks off
designed
me.
Gotham for a shallow metropolis. Suicide Squad's main problem isn't in its art direction, character design, or storytelling.
I disagree. I don't know, guys. I disagree. I think this game looks bad. Like, sure, it's got high fidelity, but this is supposed to be based in the same world as Arkham Knights. And that game is probably, God, like 5 years old, 10 years old. And it looks infinitely better than any of this stuff does.
character design or storytelling, although mileage may vary on that last one. These are all things we've come to expect and enjoy from Rocksteady, masters of their craft when it comes to creating superhero open worlds. But while it has...
Like, look at that. This legitimately looks like something that could have been on a mobile.
largely delivered on that trio of creative
I mean, it's
disciplines, the
fine.
studio's other notable
It's
strengths,
functional.
best-in-class campaign design, genre-leading...
Wait a minute. Do we think this game was actually designed to be a mobile game? And then they were like at the last moment, hey, let's put this on console and PC?
In combat systems and engaging open worlds are the areas in which Suicide Squad has stumbled. And that faltering is
thank you for
rooted in
follow.
their pivot to creating a long-time content delivery machine,
Yeah.
aka a live service shooter.
Live services are always going to be a scam because it's the promise of content that is to come. Again, some games get away with this, like look at Warframe. Warframe, because the game... Okay, Warframe is a really good example about how you do this kind of well. Because in Warframe, there is enough core gameplay for you to enjoy whilst they're still working on other content. And because the developers of Warframe are very transparent and very communicative with their audience, people are fine to wait because the gameplay has enough to keep them hooked and enough of a gameplay loop to be enjoyable whilst the next patch is being made. But if there isn't that communication, if there isn't that good balance of a relation between the developers and the audience, you're not going to have any trust. You're not going to have any goodwill. And if you are not delivering very quickly, apathy sets in. And that's the biggest killer of any game. It's what happened to Anthem. It's what happened to Redfall. You can make as many promises as you want. You can release as many roadmaps as you want. But if there isn't substance and the feeling that the developers care, people will fall away very quickly.
In the 9 years it has taken the London-based studio to finish work on
still
Kill
don't
the
think
Justice
it's-
League,
I still don't think
numerous
it's a good
examples
idea.
of exactly the same.
I would prefer that we didn't have any of this live service nonsense at all. But in the modern era, if it has to be done, at least do it like Warframe does or something like that. Where it's considerate, where there's that feel of understanding from the developers.
Kind of pivot project failing have come and gone. Yet, no change of direction has seemingly been plotted. That's likely because of the weight of the AAA machine. Like a heavy cruise liner, it can be difficult to change the course of all those resources and staff when the journey begins.
I can't even
but the
tell what's
result
going
of
on.
that is a wholly incongruous mess of a looter shooter where bland gunplay makes neither canonical sense nor an engaging gameplay loop.
Oh, and there's one thing you don't want to do. It's piss off the stands of a friggin' franchise. Like, taking advantage of an IP. Like, you throw superheroes into something. You throw Star Wars into something. You throw anything with a very loved franchise, and people will eat it up just because it's got that name to it. But you better be sure there's at least some respect to the source material. Because if there's one thing, if there's one class, if there's one type of people you don't want to piss off, it's the devotees of a certain franchise, because they will chew you out if you did not represent their My Little Pony fan base the correct way. Like, oh, the Anthro version of Princess Sparkle had friggin' D-cup titties. Well, shit, dude, you didn't give her C-cup titties. That's not lore accurate at all.
Oh, this'll make my boomerangs jealous. Sorry, ladies.
Gear progression and how it intertwines with talent trees and class abilities is a delicate balance that is by no means easy to achieve. The Borderlands series has historically done it very well, and while the
Yeah.
Pandora Gunfest...
Okay, Borderlands, I can't believe I didn't talk about this sooner. Borderlands is one of the most bare-bones looter shooters imaginable. But it makes up for it with storytelling, art direction, and actual, like, substance that is more than just the loot shooter. Like, they don't financially make the game predatory because there's nothing to predate. It's a more of a single-player game. But whereas if you look at the function of it, it's very simple and bare bones, at least what is there is really good and fun, and it's kind of funny, and it's not taking itself seriously. It's definitely something that had a bit more effort put into it than most games do. Like, sometimes you just have to you have to let the power fantasy be.
do have significant stories told throughout.
And it's goofy, it's
you
different.
always get the feeling that developer Gearbox's focus is on making the most outrageous and fun
Exactly.
arsenal to play with as possible. But
Like,
Borderlands
imagine
games...
being given a game theme. Like, imagine being given the loot shooter genre where the sky's the limits and you limit yourself. It would be like if Warframe or Destiny didn't allow you to double jump or use superpowers because it wouldn't be balanced. In a looter shooter, in a power fantasy game, you need that. And if you're stifling that because balance or because it wouldn't work, then you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. You kind of have to let people have that power fantasy.
Are, of course, not live service. Tackling that added demand of a long life of ever-expanding content
sprayed their gun
adds
with a
whole
water
new
pistol?
weight on top of all that to balance. A more pertinent example then might be Diablo, which has achieved this as successfully as anyone over the years thanks to Blizzard, a studio.
Unstable currents has a 17% chance to cast shock skill. Oh boy! Yes, how to completely super inflate a game with so little substance, but so much grind. When it comes to games like this, there is a good balance between grind and reward. There needs to be an appropriate amount of investment of time with an equal amount of appropriate reward for the amount of time put in. And when you look at Diablo, and you look at all the completely egregiously convoluted stat types, it's like, well, shit, I got the item I wanted, but it didn't have the exact stat rolls that I need, so I guess I'm gonna have to spend another 5 hours farming it. In a game like Warframe, that's not too bad. Look at the Riven system. That gives you reason to grind. It gives you reward for your time. Because the game is free, they can do that. But in a game like Diablo, you paid $60 for the game, and they're still making you grind arduously with no actual substance.
Whose very DNA is built around online multiplayer experiences. For almost 30 years, the developers refined a gameplay loop completely centered on chasing that next piece of loot. That desire to want to
That's
come
good,
back
'cause that creates
repeatedly
structure,
and
but it's the
grind
way
for the
you
next
do it
piece
that
of gear
matters.
is key to the success of a loot-based game.
Dude,
and is what I look for over.
I loved Diablo 3, as bad as it was. I thought Diablo 3 was fine. Nothing by comparison to Diablo 2, mind you. But Diablo 4, I couldn't even finish the main campaign without having a movie on or without feeling like I'd wasted my time. Diablo 4 might very well be Blizzard's peak example of how little they cared.
For all else in the genre. Strike gold with that, and even games that possess just a sliver of Rocksteady's storytelling chops,
Outriders.
such as 2021's Outriders, can keep me engaged enough to keep playing thanks to fun weapons and
Outriders was a pretty good game. I did not mind Outriders. Yeah, it was kind of superficial on launch. We were actually part of this original launch back when we were Warframe partnered. And it's good to see they're still trying. But it was unfortunately one of those things where I mentioned with things like Spellbreak. If you release your game and you have one chance to make a game's impact, and if you don't capture people fully on the first launch, people are not likely to give that game another go. Most notably shown with Outriders. They had their chance, there wasn't enough to keep people hooked, people left, and now it's pretty much sat at a pretty consistent viewer base. Nothing big, but it's probably never going to die.
abilities. One-note combat is a common thread between all of these recent failed experiments. Redfall's selection of identikit weapons didn't offer anywhere near the sort of malleable approaches that Dishonored's
Redfall was
blades
pretty
and
boring.
powers brought to encounters.
I only
Although
had fun because I
Marvel's
played it with a
Avengers
friend.
heroes did each have a set of abilities intrinsically linked to their character, the rote defend and cap.
In the defense of most of these loot shooter games, it's very hard to make loot shooters more dynamic than the core functionality because of what I mentioned earlier. Yes, you have those core functions, but there's two reasons why this doesn't work. Either the developer isn't eager enough to try something different because they're afraid of doing something different might make it not enjoyable for people who want a loot shooter. Because the people who enjoy loot shooters, they want two things: looting and shooting. And if you give them looting, shooting, and something else, all of a sudden they're like, no, my delicate loot shooter. So most of the time they just try and stick within those confines and give the bare bones of what that is. But it's not to say you can't. Innovation is important and totally doable. You just need to show that you're willing to give them something new and help nurture that enjoyment for something that is different. It takes, and this is the thing that shows in how most of these are predatory, effort. You need to put effort in to convince your audience that there is something worth playing. Which is what most of these morally bankrupt studios don't do.
Limited thrills, and Anthem's mission design was near non-existent as you jetted around its open world searching for any semblance of BioWare's famous quest writing.
Good example of a good test you can do to find out whether your game is worth playing. When you first start playing, ask yourself, what are my core experiences for the first hour? Like, what is my loot shooting? What is my traversal? what are the core features I'm experiencing? And then after, I don't know, say 5 or 6 hours, ask yourself, how much has that changed? How much has my experience improved in the first 5 hours? If it's gotten worse, or if there's no innovation or no change since the beginning, it's a sign that that's not going to change for the rest of the game. It's very rare that after the first 5 hours, if things haven't changed within the first 5 hours, then they're probably not going to change for the next 50. It's a very simple mindset to have, and it's a very good way of telling whether your game is going to be something you're going to want to play or not. Because at the end of the day, that is the choice. You have to then decide, is this game worth my time? Because if not, you might as well go play something else.
Rocksteady created one of the most influential combat systems in the form of Batman Arkham's counter-based melee flow. And to step away from this and create a gun-based looter-shooter was a bold move. Sadly, it just didn't pay off.
They just went for the simple
gun feels
answer.
fundamentally very similar to the next and last, with interesting perks and alternate fires kept at a real premium. The least you'd expect from a looter-shooter is to have interesting loot to shoot with, but the focus...
And that's the thing. He says it very well. If the studio is not willing to do something innovative, at least do what is done well. Do it well. Do the basics well. Because if they're not even able to do the simple function of making the looting and the shooting good, then what's the bloody point? You might as well go play. You might as well just live up to the sunk cost fallacy and go back and play something that's actually enjoyable. Wow, I can't believe how first world problems I sound.
on that in Suicide Squad just isn't quite there.
You're making guns for us now, Bird Brain.
It's your lucky day.
I'm all for developers trying something new in an attempt to avoid things becoming stale, but successful new beginnings are rooted in a recognition of historic strengths. I wish Rocksteady had used its previous top-tier melee combat, dense open world, and thrilling storytelling experience as a base, rather than
if they had used that in this, it would have been instantly better.
Different
Surely.
development format.
Oh, is that the microtransactions, or is that just the in-game currency?
Format. This challenge is something, to its credit, that Sony has managed well with PlayStation Studios. Time is given to each creative team to make the project they want to make, with story-driven single-player games remaining a dominant focus.
You want to know why it isn't so precedent in single-player games? First of all, it doesn't make sense. Second of all, it's more obvious that it's predatory. People in a single-player game, people are much more savvy. Like, when people are playing a story-driven single-player game, or at least more story-driven and less loot shooter, they are wanting a coherent, singular, cyclical experience. And if it's broken up by having to micromanage microtransactions or anything that breaks the story becomes instantly very apparent. In a loot shooter, you're going to be interrupted all the time, so that sort of feels more natural. But when you're in a story-based game, if you're interrupted by being encouraged to buy microtransactions or whatever, you're instantly so much more aware of it, which is why people don't stand for it nearly as much when it comes to story-based games, or anything else that isn't a loot shooter or live service.
Naughty Dog has become the standard bearer for this philosophy in the years that Rocksteady
name
spent
me
making
one
Kill the
story-based
Justice
game,
League. But that isn't
like
to
Last
say they
of Us,
didn't attempt
that has
to branch
done
out to multiplayer in that time
microtransactions
either,
and made it
with
work.
Sony recently cancelling a stuttering The Last of Us online project. We'll never know how this would have turned out, but if recent history has told us anything, it's that halting development before it rumbles on for years might have been the right move by PlayStation. Something confirmed by Naughty Dog itself in the statement announcing the cancellation.
Also, that's nothing to be said for the fact that some studios, you just expect it. Like EA, Ubisoft, dude, Assassin's freaking Creed. What did they do to that series? My God. Like, when you see a game made by a certain developer, if your instant question is, how much are they going to try and fuck me with this game? Then you know that they're not exactly the most ethically or morally credulous of people.
The studio said, to release and support The Last of Us Online, we'd have to put all our studio resources behind supporting post-launch content for years to come, severely impacting development on future single-player games. So, we had two paths in.
So Reva in my chat just asked, didn't palworld sell 90 million copies and the devs had to pay something about the servers? So, in that actually is kind of something that leads into a thing I wanted to mention. In the defense of some of these games, AAA devs and AAA studios do have production costs, and it's fair to understand that, you know, there is meant to be a monetization. If there's less of a upfront cost of the game in a wholesale, then yes, you're probably going to be expecting some kind of extra monetization through microtransactions or something else. However, when it comes to a AA developer or a indie studio, usually the production cost is a lot lower. in Palworld's example, Palworld was not... Nobody expected Palworld to be that big. It was a meme. It was it was a joke. It was a satire. And I can almost assure you, the developers did not expect it to be that big. They were going to be like, people are going to meme on it. It's going to be fun. We're probably going to get a couple of, a few, maybe 100,000 people playing. When you have that expectation, you set the standards of the game for 100,000 people. So when all of a sudden you have 19 million people in a game that was designed probably for to support 100,000, yeah, there's going to be some server problems. There's going to be some functional problems. And, the cracks will appear much more readily than what would have been if they would have had the expected amount of players playing. But the fact is that Palworld, for as much of a meme as it is, they have been communicative. They have been relative and relevant to their community. They have been very open about the state of the game. And this is like what I said with Warframe. If you have a game that is live service that might not be as polished as a AAA studio, if you have that connection, if you have that goodwill with your audience, if you show that you're listening, you can make up for maybe some of these less than developed parts of the game. It's how Warframe got through their early development cycle. It's how Palworld is getting through theirs. People are much more willing to give a game a longer chance and a longer berth when they know that the devs are taking the game seriously and when they know that the devs are listening. The fact that the Palworld has been putting update out week over week over week since launch shows that.
Front of us, becoming a solely live service game studio,
exactly.
or continue to focus on single-player narrative games that have defined Naughty Dog's heritage. That's not to say that risks can't and shouldn't be taken though, if approached in a sensible and measured manner. Interesting results can come from developers stepping out of their comfort zone and trying something new.
That's called innovation.
Their toes into the water before
try
diving
something new
first.
Who knows? There's a dichotomy. There is a dichotomy. You have a dichotomy. You have one side of the field, which is try something new, innovate. And you have the other side, which is, let's say this side is just safe. This side is the idea of doing what has been tried and true. Tried and true. On this side, you don't need to take risks. You don't need to try something new. You don't need to invest in something that you don't think might work. By doing this, you have an expectation and an understanding that you know what might happen. You have much more of you can much more accurately calculate what will happen by doing something because you've seen it happen before. This is a safe option. It's safe, it's obvious, you can make things that are predictable, and you know that certain things will work. But within that same confines, you're never going to exceed that. You're never going to get anything outside of what was made in this box. But if you try and innovate, if you try something new, yes, the risks are much higher. You are likely to encounter things that might make you fail. But if you try and risk and get past the risk and succeed, all of a sudden, you've broken out of this box and you've managed to capitalize on a much broader spectrum, and especially if it's something new that the internet has yet to see, or something that's a new experience, you will capitalize and get. It is the biggest allegory of risk reward I can give you. Do what's safe, be predictable, get expected results. Do something new, try something innovative, do it well, and have much higher potential for high rewards. It's entirely dependent on how much the developer is willing to try something new. And you tend to see that with the game, like the games like Palworld that try to do something new or risky, you see that potential for high reward. But then equally, if that risk fails, then it kind of ends up with certain people maybe not getting the attention they deserve. Like that was Anthem, that was Outriders in a nutshell. They tried something new, it didn't work. Now it's just stagnant.
In regards to PlayStation, Sucker Punch's Legends expansion to 2020's Ghost of Tsushima was a well-constructed online co-op offering rooted in its fundamentally exciting combat. The experience was scaled appropriately for an experimental DLC, offering a small but rewarding pool of gear for progressing through missions.
It's where they want to sit on that line as to whether they take the risk or they go for what's safe.
This focus was narrow, adding a handful of hours of multiplayer fun.
Like you either put it all on the line and hope hope
player
it
base.
sticks.
I still
We
want
go
to
with
see
what's
more
stable.
Sucker Punch
In
single
fact,
player.
again, palworld is the best example of this. Palworld, before they made palworld, they made Craftopia. Craftopia was very simple, very safe. It was based off of a survival element that's been done before, and they knew they'd make money from it. The money they made from that is what funded palworld, which was something new and something innovative. So sometimes you have to do something safe to then try something more risky later. Not to say you have to do it at the very beginning. This goes into the philosophy and conundrum behind like game development, but that's not what we're here for. We're here because Suicide Squad bad and the epitome of bad game design.
Their stories. But this smaller scoped experiment has at least given me confidence that they can make the looter shooter live service jump where others have fallen. Maybe it would have been wise for Rocksteady to test out some of Suicide Squad's online components in an Arkham Knight expansion before fully implementing those
but when
ideas.
Do these devs ever do anything smart?
Unfortunately,
Ha,
it's still
game
unclear to
developer
see
smart.
how far those who leaped have fallen. It can't be a coincidence.
Wait, you mean we
though,
can make
that
a
these
game without
studios
thinking of
all
money and
find
nothing but
themselves
money?
reverting back to
What?
what made them
Wait, you mean we can make a
self-respected
game and
names
think
in
about the
single-player
audience?
space?
What?
BioWare is hoping to recapture that story-driven RPG magic with new Dragon Age and Mass Effect games in development.
Exactly, Magnus.
Arcane has light at the end of the tunnel,
But it
with
was safe,
Marvel's
and it was
Blade
simple,
being
and
helmed
it
by
was
their Leon studio,
something
a
simple for
stealth
people to
combat
enjoy.
game that hopes are high for. Crystal Dynamics finds itself under the parasitic control of Embracer Group, who has seemingly done nothing but cancel projects and lay off staff since making their huge financial gamble. I hope the Tomb Raider studio manages to survive and thrive again. I sympathize with all these developers. None of whom
If anything, I think this like all overshadows one very core element, which is how fickle and how fragile game development is. And that's not something that's really, because sure, game developers might make bad decisions and financially, ethically bad decisions, but this is all precedented off of how unstable and how badly moderated and how badly mandated the entirety of the gaming industry is. If the gaming industry had better stability at its foundation, developers wouldn't feel like they had to. Developers might not feel like they had to make as many bad decisions for the sake of being stable. Like, this is why. I mean, this goes into the conversation about why unions are important. It's about why there needs to be a revolution, renaissance. Sorry, there needs to be a renaissance within the gaming scene and the animation scene to allow the foundations of the studios and the people working to feel like they can make something without it all being on the line. Like, if you are putting out one game and it could potentially completely sink your studio, there's a sentiment there that that's also something of a failing with how the industry works as a whole. And it's like a cause and effect kind of thing. And yes, that's not to say that that's the only reason. And yes, of course, most of these developers are going to be bad. But there is a little bit of that underlying element for some of these studios.
Set out to make games
having
that
to
would
make
go
these
on
decisions
be
because they
considered
have
dead
to,
on
not because they
arrival.
want to.
Instead, eyes need to be turned
Unless your
towards
name
those
is
making
EA
the
or Blizzard and you've got
decisions,
more
whether
money
these
than
be
sense, at which point
studio
you're
heads,
just fucking
publishers or
shit.
other executives, and what type of games these studios should make. The list of previously mentioned failures to launch should be the wake-up call needed to
Yes,
stop
thank you. I feel like I think we're in lieu of a renaissance.
Projects that benefit neither the developers' skill sets nor the players' ultimate enjoyment. It's a lesson that Warner Brothers seemingly never learned with Kill the Justice League, although hopefully one they've now learned, considering Suicide Squad's questionable success comes not long after the news that WB's own Hogwarts Legacy, a single-player open-world story-driven game, happened to be 2023's biggest selling game. It's too soon to say what's
not
next
going to
for
talk about the
Rocksteady,
political
which
side of that
still has
game,
the first steps
but Hogwarts Legacy might be one of the best games I've ever played in terms of like general enjoyment and polish, and in the same sense of Baldur's Gate, going to show that you can make these kind of games and not make them completely vapid and superficial.
Live service roadmap to make when Joker arrives as a playable character next month. Suicide Squad could buck
Why
the
does he look
trend,
like Jared
becoming
Leto?
a huge success that grows strong as the months and years go on.
Of all the Jokers you wanted to emulate, why Jared Leto?
I have my doubts though. I just hope it does well enough that a studio home to so much single-player talent is allowed to spread its bat wings again. For more on Suicide Squad, check out our review. And
well. What an interesting conversation. I hope my insight into this whole thing has been interesting. I'd like to know what you guys think. I mean, Suicide Squad, at the end of the day, what we've learned is Suicide Squad bad, people far too gullible to fall prey to games that are very evidently bad, and yeah, guys, stop buying games that are evidently shit, I guess. So if you guys have liked my input on this, if you like these videos, make sure to come by the stream. Join us live. My community has been putting their input in with this as we were watching it. This is gonna be like there's gonna be like 2 kind of tangents of content on this channel. We're gonna have more just reactionary stuff where we watch stuff and have fun with it, and then there's gonna be more stuff like this, which is more of like my quote-unquote pipeline content, where we take subjects and have an interesting conversation about it, and we'll see how that works over the next few months. Anyway, enjoy the video. I'll catch you later. Bye.